Okay, so if you're in your AP Classroom area here and you see the updates for coronavirus updates, this is where I'm looking. You take a peek down here under taking the exams and click on that. And you can do this for all of your exams. So they're all going to be online. And if you want to get really specific, you can look at, exam by exam. Yeah, not right now. Okay, so you have your schedule, and then as I come down here, I'm going to look for math. Some of you are taking several of these exams, so you can do the same thing for any exam that I'm going to do here. So you get the test date and time, but what I'm really interested in here is this. This tells me a lot, and part of it, they're saying up here that they explain to you how things are going to be submitted, but it also says there will be no there will be no investigative task. But when I look at this free response question, it's 25 minutes long. And what's the difference between these two? They basically say the exact same thing, but this one somehow is going to be 25 minutes long. That says to me, so maybe it's not an investigative task per se, but it's going to be investigative task-ish in its length. The spirit of the investigative task traditionally is that it moves past the scope of what we study in the course. So we know they're not going to do that. We know they're not going to ask us a question about something we haven't covered just to see how we're able to stretch our statistical understanding. So I get that. But this question is going to be longer. It's going to have a lot of pieces to it. And look what's down here. We know what's coming. So as I try to project how I would try to create a question like that can talk about multiple focus, one way to do it, for me, obviously, would be a scatter plot. Okay, that would be an obvious way for me to see if I can ask you a lot of questions about that. I can ask about explanatory response variables. I can ask a question. I can spin that into describing the study and asking whether it was observational or whether it was an experiment. We could ask about a possible bias in a wording of a question. And then in addition to that, we can also have the traditional regression questions, right? What's the slope of the least squares line, the computer printout? What do we mean by this value of r squared? So I have a suspicion this is going to be something with a scatter plot, but also asking questions about sampling and experimentation. Okay. The second free response, and it's possible that there's some overlap here, or one or the other, and maybe this one as well. One of them, for sure, is going to contain a significance test. So maybe they want to make this one with a significance test since it's longer and it takes a while to do a significance test, and then build other questions into that. I really hope they don't give you a 2 sample significance test. For me, if I was only giving you 2 open-ended questions, a 2 proportion Z test or a 2 sample T test, I feel like at this stage in the game, it would be enough for you to demonstrate your statistical understanding of inference with a 1 sample test. So I'm crossing my fingers that they give us just a T test or a 1 proportion Z test, something along those lines. But for sure, that's what you're going to see. There's going to be a hypothesis test. They're going to ask about sampling and experimentation. The probability and simulation, I'd be really surprised if they tried to work something in along those lines. Certainly not you doing one, but a lot of times what they might have is like a graph or a dot plot, particularly in a 25-minute question. And we did a practice problem like this where it said, what would you estimate to be the p-value, right? So they might, I could possibly see them getting something in there, but with only 2 questions, I feel like that could be tough. Exploring data, that's just your, maybe you have to compare 2 box plots, right? And this is where you want to make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's. So what I've done is I went together and I went through my own thoughts of what would be helpful for you to have right in front of you when you take the exam. So if you're able to print this, I think that'll be super helpful to you. But have a copy of this note sheet. I'm going to send it out in an email, and I want you to practice and interact with it this week. But you can remember some of the acronyms I gave you this year: SOX, right? SOFA for scatter plots. If they float this stuff out to us, we want to make sure we can cover all those bases. I review how to read one of these computer printouts, right? A regression. If they give that, I do think something about regression is going to be on there. I really do. Interpreting slope or a residual or prediction, something like that. With a scatter plot, you have two variables interacting. Designing studies for sure. Make sure we don't mix up whether something is observational or experiment. Experiments have their own language, right? We talk in these terms. Observational studies has a language as well. And then also, if you want to practice which statistical tests you can use, we have that web link there that you can practice and work on. And then just a reminder here what to check and uncheck. So that leads us into the last big piece of this. You're definitely going to have to do a hypothesis test. I would guess they're going to have you do a hypothesis rather than the confidence interval. But the confidence interval stuff is on there. Again, I think it's going to be hard for them to ask questions about both of them. I mean, unless they gave you a confidence interval somewhere in there and said, what would your decision on the hypothesis test be based on that? Okay. What I wanted with this sheet here is just for you to have some key things right at your fingertips. So you won't have to look them up, and you'll know that if something's a slam dunk, you'll have that. So this week, what you're going to do is interact with this in Unified Classroom. So let me show you. When you go into Unified Classroom, I don't think I published this yet, but you've got your flashcards. Those obviously would be helpful, but I just feel like there's so much that, in 2 questions I won't be able to hit everything. So I'm going to post everything the rest of the year right here in the 2020 exam review, so we can kind of streamline. We'll be practicing open-endeds that I think will focus on, what I suspect your open-endeds will look like the day of. So here are the handouts. If you want to have a confidence interval template in front of you, hypothesis template in front of you when you sit for the exam, or that ultimate cheat sheet that I just showed you. It's not cheating. It's the College Board knows you're going to have your notes in front of you. It's open note, open book. They expect that. So I just want you to have the most efficient notes in front of you. So what I want you to work on this week, it says it's open until May 20th. I might change the due date on that. I probably want you to have this done this week, but it's a series of multiple choice questions that I think feed into that note sheet. So it's going to give you some helpful interaction with that note sheet to help prep for what the exam is likely to feel like.